Hi everybody, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm just going to go through the sharing screen process and hope that this works all right. And if for some reason my computer crashes and I disappear, then I will be on my way back in. Now, can you see the right
Yes, it works.
information?
Yes.
Yep, brilliant, lovely, thank you. So my name's Alex Freeman, and I've got quite an unusual background for coming to this in that I trained and did my PhD in zoology, and then I spent 17 years as a filmmaker. So the title of this session seems to fit me. I was directing science and natural history programs, and then I came back into academia at the end of 2016 to Cambridge University, and I was really shocked at the scientific publication system and how it works and how it affects the culture, the research culture, as well as the scientific outputs. And so since 2017, I've been working on this idea called Octopus, which is due to launch next week on the 29th of June. So it's tense times for us now as we get to launch. And Octopus has got the backing of the UK government's Science Research Council, the UKRI, and also the UK Reproducibility Network, so the UK's version of the Italian Reproducibility Network. And we're in collaboration with JISC, who are builders of the UK's higher education digital infrastructure. So they're helping build it. And as I said, we're getting towards a launch, but I'm going to talk you through it and I'll show you examples from our prototype platform, which is next week going to have a whole new look and feel, but isn't quite working today. I didn't want to show you something that was going to have bugs in it. So Bastien has really nicely introduced some of the problems behind the current scientific sharing process, or research sharing, really, because I don't think it's just science. And a lot of these problems, I think, have then a knock-on effect on the research culture. There's a hierarchical structure based on the inequalities of access to this one single measure of success, this high impact publication. And that, leads to the potential for more junior researchers to become bullied into questionable research practices and losing a sense of fulfillment and control, really. So I think it's a really important problem to tackle. And I think that a lot of the problems that Bastien's described and that you probably know stem from one principal issue, and that's that journals are being pulled in different directions. They're trying to do two things, well, probably more than two things, but two important things at once. One of which is disseminating useful findings to people who might be able to use it. And that's really important. And it's probably the one that drives most of their revenue, really. If you think of the most popular bits of journals, it's the news and views or the editorial reviews. And the aim for things to be attractive and readable that then suit these general readerships and finding out what's going on drives things like word counts and the publication bias that we've been hearing about, and a lot of the questionable research practices as well, where people are trying to get their findings to look positive. But there's another important role of journals, which is being the primary research record, recording what's been done, by whom, where, in full detail. And this is really quite a thankless job. Nobody, well, very few people actually really want to read the full detail or have access to the full data. But it's really important that it's there, because when somebody does want to check it or reuse it or find out exactly how to do something and replicate it, they need this detail. And so it's almost like being a patent office for establishing priority. And that's a very specialized thing, and it requires a very different way of communicating. It's not making it readable, it's not making it short, it's not cutting to the findings, it's doing everything in detail. And that's a very specialized task. And I think, of course, journals are ending up bending towards serving that first job, and the incentive structure, therefore, ends up pushing people towards writing to disseminate and not writing to record. And because the journals are doing both of these things at once, and the paper is the only place really where people are sharing their work and having it assessed for quality, then of course we're trying to judge quality on something that's been written for a different purpose, which is disseminating findings. And if you're trying to assess how methodologically secure something is or how good the data really is, then you're not going to get that from something that's written to get to the point of the findings quickly. So I think that what we can do to sort this out is split these two jobs. And that's what Octopus is. It's designed to be the new primary research record and to take on that second job, leaving journals free to do the first one properly. And then we don't have the incentives of good dissemination bending the incentives of good research. So from that basis then, Octopus is designed entirely to maximize access to primary research and to set a new incentive structure to support good science. And key to that, I think, as well as being able to harness all the tools of the 21st century, so we can make it free to read, free to write, we can build in things like automatic language translation and automatic plagiarism detection. But I think there's another thing, and that's breaking up the concept of the paper as the main unit of publication. Now, the scientific process, or the research process, naturally comes in a series of steps. You do one thing after another, and each step requires quite different skills and quite different resources. There are certain of these steps that I can do relatively well, and certain steps that I turn to somebody else to do. I am not a quantitative or even a qualitative analyst. But forcing people to get right to the end of this process before sharing any of it is causing a lot of problems, because people put their heads down and they're terrified of sharing in order not to get scooped, because they think somebody else will take their hypothesis and then do the rest of the process. They're being forced to fit this linear narrative on what is actually, as we all know, usually quite a branching series of steps. You don't just do one set of results or data collection. You usually collect multiple sets of data. You might try lots of different analysis plans, analyses, and you might then get to the end and restart again before you want to share anything. So it's not a linear process, and only being able to publish it when you get to the end and you've got these so-called positive results is really driving questionable practices, because of course it's making people want to get an analysis that makes it look like their data fits their hypothesis. And so that's where questionable practices come in. And all of this you then try and turn into a good readable story. So it's really, this does not fit what we're doing. And instead, if we have a record that's free of those dissemination incentives, we can allow a structure of publication that much more closely matches the actual process. So each publication type linked to the one before it in the chain. And Bastien mentioned registered reports, and registered reports are where you submit to a journal for publication at the point of the protocol, and you get peer review at that stage, and you get in principle acceptance at that stage, and then you can carry out the data collection, and the journal has already promised to publish it. So it's a bit like that breaks the process up into two chunks, but Octopus breaks it up into more than two chunks. It breaks it up into these 7 linked publications, and each of these could be written by a different person. So maybe you write a hypothesis, maybe you write a protocol, maybe someone else collects the data, maybe someone else does an analysis, and then maybe you come back and write an interpretation of that. So it changes the way you're thinking about it. But there's an 8th type of publication as well, Octopus 8, and that's the peer review. And as Bastien said, this peer review is really important, and it's a really broken system at the moment. So in Octopus, peer reviews are treated like any other kind of publication. They've got equal status, and they can be published attached to any of the other kinds of publication. And I say they're treated like any other publication because we value reviewing as a scientific skill just like any other. And we try and incentivize it in Octopus in the same way that other publications are incentivized. And I'll talk about those. So this is what the Octopus looks like until next week, when it gets an entirely new look and feel. But across the top, you can see this branching structure of linked publications. And every publication has to be linked to an existing one. So you can't publish data unless the protocol is already publicly available. And that helps navigation and discovery. But there you can also see the metrics. And somebody brought up the question of metrics. In Octopus, I'm trying to make the metrics fit what we're really judging, which is quality. And so the metrics are on predefined criteria that really summarize what we as a scientific community think of as quality. And here you can see red flagging, which is an extra check which allows any reader who has concerns about plagiarism or ethical issues or any kind of misconduct can raise a red flag, which is then really obvious to other readers, but also enters an open dialogue between the authors and the person raising the red flag, which everybody else can read, which allows discussion about this potential issue. And then the authors can reversion the publication, just as in Bastian's system. So I'm hoping that this will help navigation and discovery. It'll also help people finding well-rated publications and help bring metrics closer to what people are actually looking for, which is quality. And I think that this could also be useful for funders in looking at well-rated hypotheses and well-rated protocols, and perhaps offering funding then for multiple people to collect data according to those. So it could change the way that we think about research. So this instant publication, as soon as you are ready as an author, you can press a button and it will become available and readable on Octopus as long as all your co-authors have agreed. So they'll all get an email to confirm the publication. So that allows us to move faster in science, which is really important for those who rely on our findings. It also means we have smaller author groups. Because we've got smaller units of publication, you might have much more single author work or small author work, which allows much more meritocracy. What you do counts for you. And if somebody else is doing something on a paper, at the moment, you can't tell who's doing what. And you can't tell if somebody's done something wrong, who that was. So in Octopus, the smaller author groups make that much more obvious and much easier for people to get credit for exactly what they're doing. And as I mentioned, I think it's really important that we get rid of the idea of a narrative in a paper, because it gets rid of these pressures to try and tell a good story. We shouldn't be rewarding people for good storytelling. We should be rewarding them for good science. So we really want to get at what is good research. And that varies by publication type. Good methodology is different from good data collection, is different from good analysis. And that brings me to this kind of equal emphasis on all parts of the research process. At the moment, if you read what journals and funders want, there's so much about findings and impact. And of course, those are what's important to society. But within the research community, actually, it's really important that those findings are based on good methods, on good data, on good hypotheses and ideas in the first place. So within the research community, actually, for our primary research record, what we need to be doing is encouraging people to specialize and professionalize on particular parts of the research process and get recognition and reward for doing those parts to the best of their abilities. So that means that when we assess research, we need to be looking not at the sort of impact metrics, but on real quality metrics. And so that's why this rating system, although it's vital that we get it right if people are going to be relying on it for research assessment, it does allow us to define what the incentives should be. What does good look like for each of these kinds of research? And it helps us find good research when we're searching the literature as well. So we have ratings, but of course, peer review, coming back to that, is really important as well. And in Octopus, as I said, it's incentivized by being treated as a publication in its own right. But also, as Bastian said, it's really helpful to be able to read other people's critiques of a publication so that you can understand its strengths and weaknesses from the perspective of other people who have other levels of expertise in different fields. So it's really helpful to have this post-publication peer review, and learning how to critique by reading other people's reviews, especially those that have been well rated, excuse me, is a really helpful learning process, both in learning how to critique yourself, but also learning how to do your own work when it's being critiqued by others. So this post-publication peer review allows us fast and unbiased publication in the first place, getting rid of those barriers to publication that lead to bias in the published record. But it also has these other advantages. And this reversioning in the light of reviews, as Bastian said, allows us to have a more collaborative approach to work. Instead of thinking of reviewers as shooting you down and trying to put in a barrier between you and the publication that you want, you've already got publication. The reviewers are there to be helpful. And especially if it's reviews of a protocol, say, that you're then going to go on to collect data according to. And as I said, reviews are publication types in their own right. So what I mean by giving them equal status is that every publication in Octopus is linked to your public CV on Octopus. Here's mine on Octopus, and as you can see in this test prototype version, I'm a very prolific author and I write publications of all types, which is of course not the real case. But you can see this really useful set of metrics for institutions and funders, being able to see what type of a researcher each person is from the type of publications they specialize in. So are they an ideas person, or a data collector, or an analyst, or are they a good reviewer? And what do their peers think of them? So having these sorts of useful metrics hopefully provides an even greater incentive for researchers to get their work into Octopus quickly and in the best form possible, because this is then a useful platform for funders and institutions to be able to use to assess researchers. So you've got a virtuous circle there of people using it. As I say, Octopus won't be a good read because nobody's publishing readable, nice narrative stories. But that's where I think journals can take over in the form of being a dissemination vehicle for research that needs to get to those who want to read it, or the findings of research for those who want to get to it. So all in all, I think that Octopus has a lot of advantages on a micro scale. There are lots of things that it's doing, but on a macro scale, what I hope it can do is change the way that we all approach and think about research and research careers. Because fundamentally, I really think that the research culture needs to change. Instead of thinking about findings and impact of our work, which are important to society, we need to think also about the intrinsic quality of research itself, allowing that to come through and be assessed, and to change the way that we think about doing research work, to think about ourselves as specialists, doing one bit of the work, whatever that is, to the very best of our abilities, and thinking of ourselves as a professional, say, analyst or data collector or protocol designer, and putting that piece of solid brick in the larger structure that everybody else is building with us in a collaborative effort of scientific knowledge building. And findings will come out of this as an emergent property, but it'll be on a much more solid basis if each of us is worrying about the quality of our individual brick, rather than trying to build our own towers, perhaps with a slightly dodgy brick in the middle because we're not that good at analysis, say, in my case. So I think this hopefully will change the way that we think. And the reason that I think we might get adoption of this platform is because I've tried to think about how it might improve things for many different stakeholders within this environment. So we've talked a lot about researchers, but I think there's also advantages for funders, that they'll be able to search for well-rated publications and raise what I'm calling a gold flag on publications where they are then willing to fund the next step. So we're not wasting resources on these grant applications that then have to be peer reviewed and are for huge amounts of money. For journals, I think that they can become much more focused on what they're really good at, which is synthesizing, editorializing, and getting stuff out there to people who can use it. And because Octopus can become the version of record, as it's called, then if that's in the public domain and freely available, then what's in a journal could be behind a paywall and maintain that system, because the primary research is still available to those who need it for building on. And institutions can use it to help with research assessment and understanding more about the people that are doing the research. So I think that there are advantages for many parts of the environment. So hopefully when we launch next week, next week, we'll be starting to build usage. It's not going to be a fast process, but I hope that we have both financial and political backing from enough people that we can build from this starting point. And I'm really interested now to hear what you have to say about it and whether you think it might work for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this credible overview throughout all the features of Octopus. And floor is open for questions. Yeah, Bastian, just take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Alex, for this presentation. As I was telling you, I've been following Octopus for a bit of time now, and I always thought it was a really great idea. And I think we share, in many ways, a similar view of how we should disseminate science. I have two questions. There have been some projects, not similar, but projects in which, for example, I'm thinking in physics, something about quantum mechanics, which was called Quickie, and it was created a while ago. And the idea was to share knowledge in a similar way. But then it has become, let's say, a ghost town, because it was based on the idea that researchers and scientists would come and post on their own, review on their own, and there was no any work to incentivize and, let's say, contact researchers to come. And how will you do that with Octopus to prevent Octopus to become a ghost town? And then I have another question, but I think that you somehow already answered it, because from what I have understood, Octopus is going to be, let's say, the first stage, and then journals will still be there to disseminate and share science in their own way. But my question was rather, how can we access in an easy way everything that is published in Octopus, that is, let's say, made available in Octopus? Is it going to be referenced in specific databases elsewhere where scientists are used to look for example, PubMed, Google Scholar, and so on? I'm asking this because I've been having some troubles with my own platform for this at first. And that's why I am asking you right now. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so avoiding being a ghost town, I mean, it's very difficult to predict how people are going to behave and how people are going to act. And I think what's important is to try to get all the different parts of the research environment to be using Octopus for their own purposes. So if funders and institutions are using it, then my God, researchers are going to use it. So, and if researchers use it, then institutions and funders will use it. So it's almost like everybody needs to take a big step together, which is, of course, really difficult. But this is what my job is at the moment, is to be talking to funders, to journals, to institutions, to make sure that people are aware of it, to find out what would drive them to use it, what would be useful to them, what their problems are with the moment, and how I can help solve them through Octopus. So hopefully, I mean, they're all positive, because everybody in this whole research, apart from predatory journals, and we don't worry about them, but everybody else actually wants the work to be done at a higher quality. Nobody wants a research culture that involves bullying or questionable research practices. So we're all trying to pull in the same direction, and I think people understand what you and I and others are trying to do. So it's a matter of bringing us together to make sure that this actually works on a day-to-day basis, that we're not creating extra work for anybody, and that we're making things that are easy for people to use. So I think I can't tell whether it's going to be something where nobody ever uses it, or where there's a flash in the pan, people use it and then they drift off and use something else, or whether it's something that will build slowly and will actually become greater and more sustained over time. Hopefully the latter, but who can tell? There's so much randomness in the world that it's impossible to build something that is definitely going to work like that. But I'll do everything I can to try and make it work. And your second question, can you remind me what the second question was? I'm so sorry.
It was about references, referencing the parts.
Yes. Now, you've asked me a question that I'm not an expert on here. So we do mint DOIs through Crossref, or we will come Tuesday. And I've been speaking to Google Scholar and others about indexing. I don't exactly know how it all works, but JISC, my partners, are very much in that world because they work with all of these people on a day-to-day basis. So I think the answer is that we're working on it, and that when I find a better answer, I can email you afterwards and chat to you about it. But apologies, you've hit one of the things that I know least about there. Although there are quite a few. Don't ask me about APIs either.
Thank you very much. And hopefully, I'm sure Octopus will move on and have a lot of users. I hope, at least.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for this very nice presentation. So for me, I got a question also similar to the last question from Bastien. It's very fascinating, but at the same time is tantalizing. I smell the scent of freedom, but at the same time I bound what government or institution is requiring to me.
Yeah.
So numbers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
How can we really get this kind of freedom and eliminate all these aspects? Isn't much better eventually to talk with the institution, government, and then have them on the board as well?
Yes, and yes, that's what I'm doing. So we are backed by UKRI, who are the UK's government funder. And also, we talk with all of those involved in future research assessment, the European system, DORA, all of these people, we're plugged in, we're talking to them. So I'm hoping that, as you say, it's all about the politics with a small p. It's about making sure that the people who are discussing how research might be assessed in future, how open access might move forwards, it's making sure that all of these people are aware of what Octopus might do for them. And as I said, I really think that Octopus can effectively solve the open access problem, because if the primary research, if the version of record is the Octopus version, and that is freely available, it allows all of the journals to do whatever they like with their versions. And that's not just, I'm not saying that in a cynical way in order to keep their business model. I'm saying that in a positive way, that actually what we as researchers need available to us in an open access world, what we actually want, is this detailed core data and method and code. We don't want the narrative version. The narrative version, however, is really useful, and I, as a researcher, would happily pay a subscription fee for news to be delivered to my inbox that is relevant to me in a narrative form, so that I can then go and look up, if I want, the actual core data and primary research behind it. So I think that this recognition of the different forms of research, from the dissemination version written for dissemination and the primary research version written in order to record everything in detail. I think recognition of the difference between those two and how open access is important for one and income streams can be generated from the other is really worth people sitting down and having a think of and recognizing, because I think it could solve so many of the problems that we have at the moment in the ecosystem. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I talked quite a lot.
Yes, thank you.